Hi, everybody. I'm in Clovis, New Mexico, and Heather's in Nevada City, California. It's Dr. Heather Hunt, DC, and Tantra Maat, mystic seer, prophetess, and traveler at this juncture. I want you to know that I am praising T-Mobile's cellular hotspot on my phone because it's the only reason we're airing today. AIRING, hopefully not ERRING. And so if suddenly we blip off, it is because of something has to do with our internet holding. But the second thing is I want to thank you very much, those of you that are attending this call, and also those of you who are listening later. I've actually been quite moved by the stream of watchers and listeners that have been coming on to Create a World and listening. I want to frame today's conversation because I'm largely going to turn it over to Heather. Heather and I, and yesterday another woman, there's a lot of us paying attention. 99% of what you see streamed is the truth. And it suddenly occurred to me yesterday driving that I think why this is going on is because there is a huge search for the truth. But the interesting thing about human beings is what was the truth yesterday is not the truth tomorrow. And the two disciplines, besides the spiritual ones, that I track and I ask questions of as practitioners, medical practitioners, and a therapist. Because in those conversations, I get to hear their direct experience with the people that they're working with, and I get to observe and I get to listen and see what's rising. So something happened to me while I've been gone the last 2 weeks at a mystical, you could even say paranormal and otherworldly level. That's always happened to me, by the way. It's just that you only get the storefront of the result of those experiences. A little bit more stock and trade for what the average human being can swallow. But I knew that train was going to come through. We're going to have a few trains today. I'm in Clovis, New Mexico, so I'm right on the track. But one of the things that many of you weren't around for around 2016, when all of a sudden I became so obsessive about the solar plexus, mainly because I noticed how many of my clients who were having panic attacks were actually well-developed people that actually at one level had no reason for having those panic attacks. But for me, when a particular area of the body becomes highly stimulated, it's coming back online. If you study any holistic medicine, that's how you pay attention. But over the last few years, particularly the COVID conspiracy years, COVID and conspiracy years, I've been looking for the system that's taking the hit. Like where is something shouting loud in the body, like with panic attacks, the solar plexus was. And through a series of unusual events, it became clear to me that it's our limbic system. And so I asked Heather and a few other people if they'd willing to come on with me, because there's something that happens when those of us that are intrigued and curious and listening to each other and in shared observing, there's a phenomenon that occurs. Junka Porta in his Sand Talk calls it haptic cognition, where a shared cognition begins to reveal some things that we could perhaps bet on or we could find a path, or we could track, or we could operate on behalf of it and see what occurred. So Heather jumped on today because we had to start the stream somewhere, and my beloved Christina, my office manager / admin / taking over the business, sent out a really fast MailChimp for today. So today, Heather's actually going to lay the background, that the foreground that I'm interested in is probably playing out in. Because we want to start with a larger background, a larger systemic conversation, because in our present reality, everything's chopped up. Like, you can't pay attention to the limbic system, not pay attention to what Heather's going to talk about. Can't pay attention to the solar plexus without paying attention to what Heather's going to talk about. So we're going to use, I'm going to make it like a series, either a 4-part series or a 5-part series over the next month or the next few weeks. So that those of you that really do want to use your intellect, use your intelligence to start to calm your perceptive system. Really, we're freaking out because our perceptive system is off. And when every one of us knows when we see right, when we, in consults or engagements, when we get to the actual problem, when we can actually, sometimes when I say, yep, that's really the problem, we both laugh because it's now something we can deal with, not something that we're reacting to because we're not sure what's going on. So with that said, I'm turning it over to Heather, and you're hers today. And I might pop in every now and then, but for the most part, I'm going to listen, turn off my mic because the next train's coming in about 10 minutes. Over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Tantra. And it's lovely to be here. I wanted to start. So my vision today is to lay the groundwork for the human design as being an empathic design. And this is something that I've been paying attention to for years and years, and that I'm dreaming of writing up, and it's going to hopefully start occurring soon. And it's one of the tenets of the field that I'm building called vitality medicine, and maybe even the primary tenet.
Heather, you just went on mute. Heather, you're muted somehow. Well, let's see what I can do.
Oh no, was I muted?
Yeah, you muted yourself somehow. Go for it. Okay. We got is for the last thing we heard was probably your primary tenet.
Okay, of vitality medicine, which is the field that I'm building in regards to my healthcare practice, is that the human design is an empathic design. And this all came about for me personally in the beginning of 2015. I had my first panic attack, and I've come from a very holistic family. My dad was a chiropractor. My parents were meditators, transcendental meditators since they were 20. We ate organic. So I came from quite a we consciousness from the beginning. And so for me, my major sort of crack into what we call realities of separation in the field of Tantra Maat happened after I had my third baby. And there was just like I call it the general too muchness of life. And I was actually on an acupuncturist table when it occurred. And it rocked me to my core, because it was the first time my body was telling me I was dying and that there was something really, really, really wrong. And up until that point, I'd always received good messages from my body, and accurate messages for the most part. And so that threw me into a huge tailspin, and also search, because I'm trained in the body and functional medicine. And so immediately I thought, okay, this is all this is all body, this is all physiological. So I started running all these tests on myself and blood panels and looking, and I found a few things to address, like some iron deficiency and things, to make sure that my body had the ingredients it needed to give me the energy that I needed. And then my sister at one point, the month later, said, do you think it could also be psychological, like emotional? And I thought, no, that's ridiculous. But she sent me to a great therapist in Portland, and that was a huge new chunk. And Wendy Davis, who's an incredible woman, and started a really neat organization called Postpartum Support International for postpartum moms. She showed me, yes, indeed, it was anxiety and panic. And I have trades with all these incredible practitioners, one of the top homeopaths in the country. I did everything that I could to fix the physiological and what I saw as the emotional. And I still didn't feel good. I still was getting these cortisol surges. I was running lab high cortisol. I was being told in my body all the time that something was terribly wrong. The ball was about to drop, that I was dying, likely. And it got to the point where I could see that it was not true, but I didn't have the tools to do, like, I couldn't stop it. It just felt like this wave coming through me. And Tantra talks about the solar plexus, which I want to actually stand up. It's right in here, right at the diaphragm. And that was pretty much always activated in me for all of 2015. And then I was fortunate to meet Tantra in the fall of 2015. She ended up coming in, and as she says, I glommed on as soon as I started hearing her speaking, because actually through reviewing her blood panel with her, part of my functional medicine practice, she started explaining what I was feeling in my own body, and that also I was tracking in my patient's body, particularly with the cranial sacral work I do, and also listening for these anxiety markers and things like that. And so I realized, Tantra really explained that awakening is a biological event, and that was what was occurring in my body was that I call it my timeless eternal being. There's multiple ways of saying that, was coming online and was pretty much knocking on my solar plexus in a way that I could not ignore, and I had to make space for. And so that really opened up a whole new investigation of why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And at one point she made a comment, this was sometime in 2000, because we, by the beginning of 2016, we started working together very closely and talking a lot. And I feel so fortunate to have her as a resource, because it really did give me the structure and language for things that not only I was experiencing, but really to help my patients and the people around me. Because I realized through working with her, and also in my practice seeing it, that often what I was experiencing was up at a collective level. It wasn't just me. And so that was really helpful to understand too, these larger systemic natures of what was occurring that she pays so much attention to. So in 2016, she made just a passing comment one day leaving the office, like, well, don't you think all your patients are empaths? And I said, yes, of course. And then I thought after she left, like, oh, what is an empath? I don't even know that word. And so I looked it up like I do, Googled it, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And then and started explaining a lot of how I feel in the world. And then I read the book by Judith Orloff. She's a doctor, and she wrote a great book called The Empath Survival Guide. And I read that, and then it was like chunk, 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 chunk. Things started falling into place even more. And then I started really, by 2017, I had these tools in place, and physiologically, I'd kind of quote fixed most of what was wrong in my blood panels and gut panels and hormone panels and all these things, because I had to satisfy that part of my brain. And yet I was still feeling these surges, right? I pretty much knew by that time I wasn't dying probably, but I wasn't, it still was not comfortable to be in my body. And so I really started investigating this empath thing. And interestingly, I think it was 2017, empathy or empath was one of the highest Googled words, which I thought was a really good sign. And the whole country was kind of looking at this, and there was a lot of discussion, and there still is, about like, who's an empath? What is an empath? And the roots of empathy even go back, interestingly, only I believe it's the 1800s, maybe late 1700s, where it's really about feeling into, and it came out of the art world, where one could look at a piece of art and feel that art and feel certain things in their bodies in response to the art. And then now it's become more of a, either you have it or you don't. Like, either you're empathic or you're not. And because we live in a world of separation, it's changing a little bit now. I keep pretty good tabs on this because I find it fascinating. But basically, so there, you can Google empathy. There's so many resources. But for me, it is that feeling into, and being able to feel in your body another, whether that's a human, if it's their emotional or physical state, whether it's a tree, whether it's a rock, whether it's an animal, whether it's something going on in the cosmos, whether it's something going on under the earth. And we feel these things in our bodies that oftentimes we don't understand or have a register for why we're feeling the way we're feeling. And so after I started having that framework of okay, I'm an empath, I'm experiencing things empathically from the world around me and also from within my body. Because I was still running high cortisol, which that hormone itself is the major stress hormone. And when we release that, say we're running low blood sugar and we release it from just that, we feel, you feel like you go into a fight or flight response. It's what's preparing us for a stress event. It's what responds in a stress event. And so whenever I was still running that cortisol, which was still telling me, fight, flight, or freeze, like, be on guard, you're in survival mode. But I was increasingly having these registers of, okay, is this me actually dying? Is this like chemical warfare in Syria? Is this that I just had a disagreement with my spouse? Is it that one of my kids is sick? There's just, so I started really being able to discern. And this was, I think, really important from a perception point of view. With the thought point of view, is that I could use my, executive brain, my prefrontal cortex to really start distinguishing out what was occurring. And so then, as vitality medicine started developing, and as I started talking to patients, one of my favorite things to explain to them is when they come in and they feel like they're dying, or they feel terrible about themselves, or they have chronic pain, or they're constantly, like stressed or getting sick. I basically think Tantra was correct, what she said years and years ago now, that everyone who walks into my office is an empath, because I think that all humans are empaths, that the human design itself is an empathic design. And so what I love doing is explaining right off the bat to the patient, oh, you're having all of these things because you care, because you feel, because you're connected and your body's letting you know. And so sometimes I joke like, oh, you just have to become a psychopath, then you'll be fine. But that's not a great answer, really. But what Tantra and I have been teasing out for years and years is this this idea of empathic response, of being in response to what we're connected to empathically, instead of being in reaction, right? And so I was in a highly reactive state from, I would say, earlier than 2015, just sheer overwhelm of everything. And probably, this deeper nature of myself coming online. And I call it the mystical mind. It's always been there, but not until I had kids was I was blown open empathically, having children even more. And then the coping strategies I had to deal with those sensitivities were all taken away from me, because you can't like do yoga or go walking in nature or have quiet time when you have little kids that need you. So Yeah. So honestly, at this point in my career, I've been paying attention to this for, 6 or 7 years. And I can basically tell you what I call a high empath, because there are ranges, right, of how people experience empathy in their lives. And John O'Donohue, the Irish poet, has a really beautiful, he talked about empathy in a way that, because people say, oh, not all humans are empaths, because what about narcissists? And John O'Donohue said, narcissists are so in need of love that they have to focus all their love on themselves. But that need for love, that's our symbiotic human nature. That's our empathic design. So things get broken and aberrated and severed in this world we were born into, and we see that constantly. So that's not a big surprise. But I think the empathic design still holds. So on a blood panel, for instance, I can see the results of a high empath, which are pretty striking in like their blood sugar and their thyroid, adrenal glands, B vitamin levels, vitamin D levels. It's somebody who is just sort of overwhelmed with the world that they live in. And the problem is then we internalize that and we think that that's our fault, that we're deficient, that we can't handle it, that we're too sensitive or too emotional. But the fact is that we are living in a world that doesn't support our empathic design. It doesn't give us the time and space and nurturing to be who we are at a fundamental level. And I think about myself and what I need in order to feel balanced. And I feel incredibly blessed because I was born into a very loving family. I got to go to Waldorf school, which is the only educational system I know that is actually made for empaths. Rudolf Steiner designed it to support and nurture empathy. And I've been remarkably blessed with my life, with relationships and where I've gotten to live and having enough money. And it's still hard. And so I don't understand, I mean, from a mental level, how people survive. I mean, the survival capacity of the human and the craving to thrive and the craving to live and dream and hope is so amazing that people from all walks of life with all sorts of trauma histories are making it in this world. And with vitality medicine, I just want to give people and practitioners, particularly other practitioners, the skills. First of all, the identification of, what if we're all empaths? What if it's not our fault? What if we're suffering because the world doesn't support who we fundamentally are, our human nature? And then how do we treat each other and treat people to support that empathic design, right? So what would happen if you walked into a doctor's office and they said, I have an intake that I have people do for functional medicine, and I have an empathy part of it. So I can I've figured out questions to measure the level of empathy, like your level of sensitivity, or not empathy, maybe it'd be sensitivity there is better, but I think of it as empathy. And what if all doctors had that? So when you came in, they would say, oh, I see you're, more sensitive than some, and probably more sensitive than the trials that, medicine was founded on and the experiments. So why don't we try this medication, but let's start you at a quarter dose and just see how you do. Because I think if we gave you a full dose, that would blow you out, considering this sensitivity score that you have, Or what if they really say, I know you're here at a chiropractor, but do you really want physical adjustments? Do you want manual adjustments? Or should we start you with more of a light touch treatment to really just make sure that your body is very comfortable every step of the way? And so that we can really remind yourselves that they are safe, and we're here to nurture you. And we're here to take care of all of who you are, not just this bone out of place in your neck, right? And I think fundamentally we deserve that as humans. And we try to create that for our children. We try to give, the whole until my youngest son was 7, which is when Rudolf Steiner says that they stop living off your etheric field. I felt like my whole energy was wrapped up into making this world for my children, and I could feel these forces pushing in, and these ancestral, and I just felt like I was a giant dam. I was like, stop, it's all stopping with me, and this is what we're moving forward with. This is the world I want my children to be alive in. And what if we all had this, and then I have support in that. My husband's on board, my family's on board, they go to a Waldorf school, they get to be nourished in love of learning, and they knit and crochet and do art, and they think they're amazing at everything, even though my 10-year-old can still not even read very well. It's like, but what if we had these worlds that we were really nurtured empathically? And then, since we are working towards that, the more immediate is, how do we deal with our empathic response? And how do we create discernment around it? And Tantra and I she's had this book, The Mind of Creation, that we've been talking about finishing since probably 2017 or 18. I don't know. It's been a long time. Definitely 2019, because I have recordings of us talking about it in early 2019. And we actually put pressure on the field, and that book was completed, I think, the end of last year. And there's a whole chapter on empathy in there. And Tantra has a really, I would say, different view of empathy from the mainstream. However, the more I read about the history of empathy, I can't remember the author's name, but I'm reading a book called Empathy by a lovely woman who is at Harvard, and she studies the history of thought. And she wrote a book on empathy. But Tantra actually is more similar to what I understand the beginning roots of empathy are, but it's even different. And I can't wait for everyone to read that chapter. But I was hoping maybe, Tantra, you could talk about empathy from the perspective of the mind of creation, if you feel that's good, or we can go elsewhere. But I'm complete. Oh, can't hear you. There you go.
No, I hadn't opened. First of all, it's interesting just in this conversation, because actually it doesn't say anything different than what you're saying, but somehow the way it's perceived, it sounds different, but it isn't. And so I was listening to you and I was thinking, because I'm really paying attention to perception. It's interesting, Kea, one of the people in the field of the Tantra Maat, said the Institute, the Language of Consciousness Institute, needed to have prescription remedies. And so I'm sort of sitting here going, I think I'm doing prescription remedies here. But I want to share a couple of them in what you said. First of all, how we perceive the body. And I'm going to leave it alone for people to ask that question of themselves. How do you perceive your body? But I do know that we analyze it. We don't use it for a register. We don't use it to register. It is always having a conversation with us about our reality. Always. It is always having a conversation with us about our circumstances. It is always having a conversation about what is life enhancing and life defeating. It never stops registering on your behalf. And I don't think we realize that. So with Heather's story, when I met Heather, I knew that the deeper wisdom of her being had been awakened by her child, because I was noticing, see, it's only going to come through when I'm talking, the train. It's a new bond, okay. I suppose. It's just a new bond. Just reminding me of all the times I used to hop the freight between Kingsport and Knoxville, Tennessee.
It's also geopathically connecting us.
Exactly. So the thing is that the body, if we perceived it as a register and we shaped our lives around what it was registering, or going back to what I was saying about her third child, what I was also noticing when Heather had her third child, that there were actually children coming through. And I was having a lot of young mothers who really felt like they were being reconfigured in caring of a child, something I'd never seen it before in my day or in my birth birthing of my children day, it was more like you were a woman, you had a sack, a child was in it, it came out. But when this phenomenon called empathy began to be restored in the human system, it began to come back. Because we can only take so much trauma as a culture before the empathic nature comes back online actively, because it is what has us survive, which she calls caring and loving. It's actually, we can't avoid that life is harmful for some people, and human beings, when they're in that empathic response, which is simply registering the tug of creation between all human beings. It's just how we're all glued together. That's why Heather can say that a human being is an empathic design, because empathy is what glues us all together. Jedi Knights knew empathy through a ripple in the force, or feeling something happening in the force, and registering that something was not operating on behalf of life, but also registering when something is operating on behalf of life. But what I noticed is during the era of Heather's third child, a lot of mothers were literally being molecularly altered by the children they were carrying, because those children required an environment that was distinct from the what we'd been coping with for years. And it fascinated me. So I had a direct experience of Heather's third child, who I look at every time I'm on her table, and look into his eyes, and he really is that.
Right there.
Yeah, he really is that. And I knew that she had been molecularly altered to simply be the deeper nature of her being that connects her to life and has her exist as whole. Therefore, everything around her is connected to life and begins to exist as whole, which is field phenomenon. So that was the first thing. And so there's a perceptive issue, because we think the body should have us lead lives that go against us effectively. We think the body should handle gigantic loads of stress and jobs we don't want to have, marriages we don't want to be in, foods we don't want to eat, we know aren't healthy. The body is just simply registering, I don't think so. No, not that. Danger, danger, Will Robinson. That's all it's doing. It's a register on behalf of life. And that register on behalf of life is not only an individual register, which is all humanity has become isolated from itself and has become isolated from each other. It's a pattern of consciousness, like an invasive species that comes into, like bamboo, that came into Hawaii and destroyed the most beautiful flora and fauna you'd ever seen. It's an invasive consciousness. I have no idea how it got here, but it has caused humanity to be isolated from itself, isolated from its internal nature, isolated from its union with all life, isolated from other human beings. And then it seems to have turned us against ourselves, turned us against each other, and turned us against life itself. It's a pandemic long before COVID ever came on the scene. So we're meeting an edge point, a turning point, a tipping point, better said. I don't think we're in the turning point yet. But that tipping point makes every human being incredibly important, because every human being begins to listen to their body. And for a lot of human beings, the body's forcing the listening. Because it evolves before our personalities. Our perception takes a long time to catch up with what our bodies are doing. A long time. It's why Heather and I and others are in these conversations, so we can get on the side of our own transmutation. We can get on the side of our own evolution. And we can stop being in the dark ages in our own head. In our, when you begin to register, the registers work for you. You don't have to look for truth outside yourself. When you register something as real for you internally, the guidance is for you. It's not for you to go tell everybody else that that's the right guidance, because we're very unique. We're very individuated. We're all part of a gigantic spectrum of color and sound and frequency and material and matter and molecular and atomic and particles that make us each incredibly unique, but all part of a larger system. That's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing, Heather, that I want to put in as a perception remedy, possibly, is this idea of, and I was just, the minute you started talking about it, because what I have learned through doing engagements is that that when I talk and I share with the person completely registers what I'm saying, only somehow it calms them down. Like they sink into the accuracy that they feel in themselves that matches what they hear in my words. It gives it a place. And it gives it a place outside of the perception that our minds are still trying to control us in. It's called being self-aware. Mm-hmm. And it's really important for me in the creative world chats that we're giving people the opportunity to turn to be self-aware, not self-defeating, not coming after, judging ourselves or coming after ourselves, because that makes the body ill. Mm-hmm. The body is working its butt off right now to transmute. And if we think it's our enemy or we're against it or we want it to stop doing what it's doing, we're not on its side, and it becomes very confused. So our perception can truly confuse a body, truly. And by the way, bodies don't know outcomes any more than we do. Bodies are just busy systemically at work. They don't know how long, they couldn't have told Heather, the panic attacks couldn't have told Heather how long it was going to be before she stopped having them. They just knew they were working something through on behalf of life. And they're always working something through on behalf of the next greater whole. Always. And we just never got the thinking that lines us up with that. But the one that really startled me when you were talking, Heather, for our inquiry, for our investigation, we're not solving anything in these conversations. We're opening it up for thinking, curiosity, confusion. Wow, I had never thought about that before. It starts to railroad the invasive consciousness that has us at its beck and call. And that is when you talked about empathic response. And I am sure, positive, that human beings, as you did, confuse empathic response with trauma response. Mm-hmm. And the difference is that a trauma response is something that happened to the body that went against life, and had you not be able to exist as whole, either a shock or a biological issue, but it created a fear of life in the body. That's a trauma response. An empathic response is exactly the opposite. An empathic response is your systemic consciousness, your self, like the Jedi Knights. If it could talk, it would go, need to become calmer. Need, like we did once with a fire in the thread, need to be calm, need to be centered, need to be more filled with love, because in the wiring of what holds us all together, when there's a shock or something happening against life in the field, human beings once just recentered to hold life, to hold still until the trauma could pass through the system. So what Heather was talking about where was the trauma coming from? Where was the panic coming from? Sometimes it isn't just to identify it. It's who we be, which is in that chapter. Who we be when we do identify it. How we move our bodies, how we shift our mood. And right now it's particularly challenging because the humanity is beginning to get that our system of existence is collapsing, and it's getting much closer to home. It's getting much more on our own porch. It's no longer just in the homeless and just in the downtrodden and just in the refugees. The whole system's collapsing. So every molecule of perception, every neural stimulation of perception that was looking for the outer world to be our support structure, not our inner world, is also collapsing. And so we are becoming a biological event. We are becoming an empathic response. It's not an I that empathically responds. It is us in the empathic response of the shifting currents of reality and needing to hold that compassion. It's so hard to talk in this language because we have all these as objectifications. We have these things to apply. And when you're, like I said earlier, when you're in a system, the system isn't saying, okay, Heather, you're going to be in a panic attack for 6 years, deal. It's just working its system. And we got to learn how to work our system. We got to learn how to understand our bodies and how they operate on our behalf, because they can work faster if we know what they're doing. We know what they're registering. And of course, I shared this in the call yesterday. It's still my favorite ever conversations. And I probably shared it here 100 times, but I think we haven't done 101 of these. So luckily I haven't. But I just go back to my client who said, Tantra, I think I'm having a healthy panic attack. And I thought she meant something terrible had happened. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I left my husband, I left my job, I'm selling my house, this is what I'm doing. And she said, and my system's just panicking at such a dramatic shift, but it's a healthy panic attack because I shouldn't be in my job, I shouldn't be in my marriage, and I shouldn't be where I'm living. So she was able to take action, even though the system was guarding her like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? But there was also this incredible life force energy, excitement, turned onness, thrilledness. And she and her body had come in union with each other. She really had PTSD. She had been someone supporting refugees in Syria and found out something terrible going on. And basically, nobody did anything about it. Somebody tried to kill her. And she came back to the States with real PTSD. So she knew the difference between healthy PTSD, which is us simply operating on behalf of life, and what has us exist as whole, and letting the body be the guardian at the door saying, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? And you're saying, yes, yes, yes. And now she's back. She's back 10 times more real than she was when I met her, and now capable of taking things on in a manner that is unbelievable in regard to world affairs. So it isn't just a matter of feeling better to do our day. It's to become part of the operation of life itself so that we can contribute out beyond the edge of what has cost us a world, who humanity has been up until now as the majority, and what has ruled humanity has cost humanity a world. And now our bodies are actually trying to get healthy. They're actually trying to become calm, because there just must be another world. There just must be. So one of the questions I want to leave people with is what you are doing, which is I really want them to investigate the value of empathy. I really want them to investigate the value of that the body's only registering on your behalf so you can make choices and decisions that operate on behalf of your life and what as you exist as a whole. Over to you. I'm sure something must have come up as I was talking.
So many things, but I think I want to start a little more clinically, which is responding to that question of how do we support the body? And because the ways in which we do that really do make a difference in our day-to-day experience. And now I don't, once in a while, get still kind of close to panic, but mostly now I register it as high frequency energy coming in. But I have so many tools. Like I'm sitting at my desk and I have like supplements in my desk drawer, and I have like little things that I use. And there are parts of, because the world isn't taking care of our empathic design, we really need to do that for ourselves and ask. This is where the transparency and vulnerability comes in. So while in our personal relationships is that we have to find a few safe people to be very transparent and vulnerable with and have support, I think. I mean, personally, this is, we need a field to work in. When I was running such high anxiety, my husband actually became an anxiety trigger for me, which was really bad for our relationship. But once my therapist explained that, because I was sure everything was his fault, and within the first 10 minutes, I realized it was just my, with a session I did with him, it was just my anxiety. It really not quite saved my marriage, but it definitely helped. And then I was able to start, it's taken years, but I've been able to start being more and more transparent and vulnerable, even with my husband, with other, people in my life. And that's absolutely necessary for this, supporting your empathic design. And it doesn't have to be a lot of people, but you have to have a few support people. And they don't even have to be in your life physically, I don't think. We do a lot online with the field of Tantra Maat. And that's part of what I'm building with Vitality Medicine and my free membership there on Mighty Networks. Is the goal is to create a space where there's community of people that you can say like, I'm feeling crazy today. Is there something up? Are other people feeling it? And then other people go, oh my gosh, I didn't sleep either. And I mean, that's so helpful to have that. And then there's also really basic things like, I think just moving beyond thinking what we really need to support ourselves as empaths is not because we're deficient. It's not because we're weak. It's not because our bodies aren't working. It's because, or there's something wrong. It's because our bodies aren't letting us continue the status quo anymore. Our systems aren't allowing it. So, myself and others have become more reactive to foods we eat, or more sensitive to being out in public, or you might be, I definitely feel more like, oh, I didn't realize I was quite so introverted. Like, that's new. I thought I was an extrovert, So but that's not out of places of weaknesses. This is out of place of my favorite definition of healing. It's the Sanskrit word swastha, which means establishment and self. Like these are all things out of ourselves establishing in ourselves, which is who we are in our kind of truest forms, and why we came here and what we're here to do, and our deeper natures. And for me, that also, in my practice, I really help people with just like blood sugar. So, cortisol surges and goes crazy from a physiological level if you don't eat, or if you don't eat enough protein, or, things like that. And how many times I can help people so much just by walking them through how to eat in the course of a day, or tracking their food with something like Chronometer, which is a free app, and making sure they're getting 70 grams of protein, or, there's so many things that, eating regularly. I'm pretty much off all caffeine now, which is really weird. But my system told me in December, I don't think you need that anymore. And I can't tell you how much more stable I feel during the course of the day with my energy and these kind of high frequencies that come in, because caffeine spikes your stress response system. It spikes your adrenaline, and then that messes with blood sugar. And so the more I kind of fine tune my own system, the more I'm able to see what's aggravating it from, in ways I can control, right?
I want to respond to that, Heather. I think the two, you all are getting a lot of information today, and it triggers our need to apply. Like, if I apply this, I'll be okay. But what you want to do is just absorb the information.
Right.
One of the things you can count on with consciousness is it absorbs information, and you begin to start being in the forming. So don't let your mental register try to register this. Let your body register it. We're in a coherent field, Heather and I. It's the field of Tantra Maat. We're also attracting other coherent collective fields. And we're becoming a larger, as Barbara Marx Hubbard said, these islands of coherency begin to generate pathways in the molecular atomic system that the mental mind does not have time to process in any manner. So the first thing I want you to do is just be in an absorption state. Just trust your body to absorb the registers that it to register and absorb what's needed. And then when you find yourself wanting to start to shift, don't get hooked by the mechanistic mind that judges every step you take. There's no ability to be a new learner or a new beginner. We are like really up against a huge monster mind that really we never meet. We never meet the grade with it. Never. You can count on it never giving you a quarter inch. So we're really eager, Heather and I and others. We're really eager. I mean, eager beyond measure. It's why we're doing Create a World. It's why we're taking our time to do it. Because we want you to trigger your own consciousness. We want you to not be coming to us because we have the answers for you, but because we're resources within which you can find your own. And we've done a lot of work to figure out some methods and some applications that seem to are grounded. They're no longer assumptions, they're assertions, because they have been grounded in evidence and they've been grounded in working it out with people and having people come back and say, this worked. So this is a difficult time. Everything in us is collapsing, every perception we have. And we still think there's a place to get to. Wherever we were going to get is gone. We are the formers. We are being informed and we are informing, and we are the ones internally that are informing ourselves, one step at a time, sweet Jesus. And it's just really important. I was sharing with a young woman who will be on the call May 13th with me, Daniela, and I was saying to her that the most dangerous thing right now is for you to look for truth or look for solutions. You want to look to be informed. You want to get informed where you can make your own decisions. But underneath that, the most important thing is, do you want to? Do you want to live? Do you? Do you want to become self-aware? Do you want to trust your consciousness and your body? Or do you want somebody to do it for you? Jesus was really clear. No more self-sacrifice. He was talking to us personally. And he said, here, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm doing it for all of us. Now stop it. So this idea of what Heather said, what's the word again about self?
Oh, establishment in self.
Yeah, that establishment in self is the key to the kingdom. It goes beyond any remedy. It goes beyond any truth. To be established in self is the key to the kingdom. Go ahead, Heather.
I was just remembering a tearful conversation I had years ago with my husband, and when I was feeling particularly anxious and terrible, and him saying, Heather, you just need to, listen to the still small voice, your still small voice. And I was like, I can't hear it. Like, that's the problem, as I cannot hear it. Like I'm not getting it. And so I would just reflect back to you, Tantra, remembering being in that place and having you say, like, how would you have talked to me back then when I was like, I just can't hear it?
I would have said, then just keep listening.
Yeah.
Look, we've been suppressed beyond, I'm gonna cry. we as a species have been brutally suppressed. I have no idea what got in our systems as a consciousness to make us go after ourselves with such viciousness. And then to identify it as ourself, so that this incredible woman you're listening to couldn't hear her own small voice and thought something was wrong with her because she couldn't. But she didn't do that to herself. You know, I walked myself in my teens and 20s. I walked myself wondering if I was crazy because I could hear that still small voice. Mm-hmm. And it was not having the conversation around me. It was not the conversation I was hearing in the world. It talked about paradise. It talked about worlds where we loved each other openly, without measure. Where we went to our ground sobbing because we lost someone that we didn't even know. And what I find so amazing, I'm not just crying because I'm sad, I'm crying because I'm also excited, is this amazing thing that's been shot up with vaccines, given enough bad food to literally, we could be a mummy in a sarcophagus, and we're so stuffed like an animal, you know, that we're taxidermied. In the midst of all that, it recognizes who we are. It's fighting for us. Mm-hmm. It's fighting for us. And it's either saying, get this damn thing out of my system, out of your system, out of our system, or it's saying, calm down so we can reboot, or it's saying, come on, let's transmute. And so I want that to be the lens you listen to Heather and others, because we're going to really be going for it the next 4 to 5 weeks. We're going to be having conversations that can really rock and roll your world on purpose. Because if we don't get in the rock and roll of it, if we don't get in the rock and roll of it, we got nothing. We just got being taken out. We just got being at the effect. We ain't got nothing. And this beautiful mind we carry, this mind of creation that has gotten human beings through many, many a bad day, is still operational. And there's a lot of evidence when you have digital technology, when the world is bound together. We are empathically related through Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. I don't care how people try to objectify it and get rid of it. We're connected. You know, you can stream garbage through it or you can stream live through it, but you're still wired in. A living demonstration of empathy. It's a living demonstration of empathic response. We would not have them if we weren't empaths. We would not. So we have a chance now that the world is pretty much wired together, even though people are trying to keep people from being wired together, to actually turn the system into the system we were originally designed to be. And anything interimly doesn't interest me at all. But we got to take care of the interim to get to the final act. Okay, Heather, over to you. We got 2 minutes.
That's beautiful.
Anything?
I guess I just want to say, if people want to be part of the field that I'm building as well, which is in partnership with the field of Tantra Maat, is to come on to Vitality Medicine.
Okay. Go ahead.
It's vitalitymedicine.live, LIVE, and it's free. And I try to post something once a week, but there is some backlog. And what I'm really working to do is to build that field so it becomes a self-sustaining field also with these tenets that we're talking about. And so anybody's contribution or assistance with that, I'm thankful for.
That's beautiful. You know, coherency is the name of the game. And when you come together on behalf of life and you're paying attention to it with others in the field, really incredible magic actually does start to occur. Thanks, honey. I'm about
Thank
to get
you.
on the road again. I'm going to go follow the railroad track to Albuquerque.
All right.